Hey everyone, I'm Lefty, and I am back. This time we are here for the Fairway Drivers episode of Building the Bag. Now, the Fairway Driver in general is basically the core, the backbone of my bag. Besides the putting putters, it is the most used slots in my bag. Any shot really over 240, 250, that is what I'm using the Fairway Drivers for. So I depend on them a lot. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hello everyone, before we begin, if there are any discs that you see in this video that you want to try for yourself, be sure to go over and visit GreatLakesDisc.com. Also, if you want to save 10% on your order, be sure to use promo code Lefty. Now buckle in, grab some popcorn, because we got a long one here for you. Let's jump right in, taking a look at the understable discs. So when it comes to the understable fairway drivers, I am looking for two specific shots for them to fill. The first being when thrown flat, I don't want them to come back almost at all. I just want them to start out straight, and then when it gets about halfway through the flight, just have it start to turn over, and then just turn and hold the entire way to the ground. And then also when thrown on a hyzer with maybe about 50% power, as we're kind of seeing here, maybe a little bit of turn, but just something that just rides absolutely dead straight and a little bit of fade. And I'm looking for that in both kind of a speed 7 and a slightly higher speed 9, speed 10. Now, with the sting here from discraft and titanium plastic, I really get what I'm looking for. You can see with the hyzer flip, it flips up to flat, gets a little bit of turn, then has a nice minimal fade at the end. And then on the turnover, it does turn over fairly quick, but still, that's kind of just more maybe starting it on a slight anhyzer instead of flat. Next, we have the DGA Vortex. This is one that I had been using instead of the Sting. The main reason, I just felt the Sting, I don't know, it was almost a little bit more torque resistant. My form was really messed up in 2022, and even understable discs did not feel understable. Well, I have corrected that by the end of 2022, and now the discs are flying more like what I thought they would. And so now the Vortex is being a lot more understable for me, and so is the Sting. Which is actually great for me because I always preferred the Sting's feel in terms of how the profile feels in the hand, being slightly domed, versus the Vortex is a little bit flatter. So if you like a flatter understable fairway driver, definitely go for the Vortex. I'm still torn in regards to the flight. It might come down to the feel, but we're going to have to see which one I decide to choose. Now, stepping up to the speed 8, speed 9 category, as I say, I need something a little bit longer than the Sting or the Vortex for the more wide open shots or just bigger turnovers. I mean, the Diamond is almost too flippy for me. I can barely get this thing to not turn over. Out of about 10 to 15 throws, this was the only one that I could get that it did not fully flip over. And I had to throw it on that huge hyzer line at about 30-40% power just to get that result. Normally, this is what it did. Any angle, goodbye. Yeah, this thing is super flippy. And this is in completely calm conditions with just how understable the Diamond is. This is a great beginner disc. If you have someone who's just learning disc golf, get them the Diamond. It's lightweight. It flies very well for slower, really slow arms beginning players. It's a good hyzer flipping tool, but for what I'm looking for, it is just way too flippy. Now, next with speed 9, we have an ESP heat, and this is what I had in the bag for 2022, and now that I've corrected that form issue that I mentioned earlier, this heat is flying more what I would expect it to do on those kind of longer turnover shots. I can throw it with just a slight little bit of hyzer, get it to flip up to flat, and then it just starts to turn and it almost doesn't want to come back. Depending on height, it will try to check up towards the very end of the flight, but in most cases, when being out in the woods and shaping shots, I'm going to throw it a little bit lower than this and it's just not going to come back. So at least out of these choices so far for like the speed 9 category, 8, 9, that's kind of what I'm looking at is that heat. Now, we do have the Maverick Infusion X. I was wanting this more in the semi-understable realm. I do have another Maverick, a prototype Maverick in that spot as well. This was a little bit more understable than I was expecting. Yes, the Maverick in general is understable, but the Maverick in this plastic has just a little bit less resistance to that high-speed torque that other plastics of the Maverick have for me. So this is definitely one that is kind of more in that pretty understable category, especially if I throw it flat, maybe to a slight anhyzer line. I can get it to hold a turn very well. It's not quite as understable as, say, the Vortex, the Sting, the Heat, the Diamond, but this kind of almost bridges the gap between those very understable fairway drivers and what I'm looking for in just like a semi-understable. It really bridges the gap between that section and this section very well. Now, with the semi-understable fairway drivers, this is where we see that prototype Lucid Maverick. This is the one that the first Maverick that I threw, obviously being a prototype, and the one that made me fall in love with the Maverick. I still have not been able to find a fairway driver like the Maverick out there, so I'm so happy I get to try it out again and see if I still like it after all these years. This is what I'm looking for a slightly understable fairway driver. Something I can throw it on a slight hyzer, get it to effortlessly just hold very straight with just a bit of fade at the very end. Great for hyzer flipping, great for just wooded shots, being able to just have a complete laser beam of a disc down a tunnel while being very controllable being a fairway driver. This really checks a lot of the boxes off. Even after not throwing it for several years, I am still a huge fan of the Maverick, and I highly recommend it to so many different players. Now, one disc that has really surprised me so far is the Leopard 3 in the Halo plastic from Innova. In terms of feel, I love it. For an understable to slightly understable disc, it has that nice gradual dome to it, slight pop top in the middle. It just fills the hand. I just feel like I have extreme control when it comes to backhanded shots. And also, it flies very similarly to the prototype Maverick that I love so much. So great feel and great flight. It maybe has just a little bit more torque resistance than the prototype Maverick, but this is a very, very similar disc. And honestly, with that extra torque just means that in windy conditions, it's really going to hold up just a little bit better. Also on the plus side, it has very good glide to it, so even being a fairway driver and a slower fairway driver at that, I'm not missing out on too much distance. Next up, we have a disc that some of you might recognize, and that is this Proline Flex Pipeline from DGA, a disc that has been in and out of my bag for the last couple of years, and it's one that I definitely like because of the plastic. With that flexibility, it feels very comfortable in the hand. I do like gummier plastics. It doesn't quite have the dome on it as, say, the Maverick or the Leopard 3, but the flight is on point, and also, this is one of the furthest flying fairway drivers I have ever thrown. This thing has such good glide and surprisingly a good amount of speed to it despite only being a speed 8. I can sometimes, if I hit it right, get it out with some of the distance drivers. Now, next we have the Heat in the crystal plastic. This I really like and is probably going to be my go-to when it comes to very big, long turnover, slightly understable shots, or if the wind is up a little bit and I just need an effortless flex disc that will come back towards the very end. Yes, it is a Heat, so it's going to be understable, but again, in the crystal plastic, it has a little bit more late stability to it, so it will fight out of some of these flex lines and still manage to fight its way back towards the very end. And because the Heat has such crazy amount of glide to it, I really don't have need for those speed 12, speed 13 understable drivers. This gets out the same amount of distance potential as those because of my arm speed and is also easier to control. So to me, that's a win-win. Alright, let's go ahead, switch things up, and take a look at the straight to semi-overstable fairway drivers, starting with the FD and C line from Discmania. This is a disc that up until just before shooting this video, I had no experience with at all. Didn't know how it flew. I heard a lot of people say it is just extremely straight, a little understable with just a little bit of fade at the very end. I did not find that to be the case for my arm speed, at least when it comes to these newer runs of the FD. This is very straight at the very start of the flight, as shown here. It has a nice straight flight, but then as it slows down, it just checks up and it just wants to hyzer. I could see myself being able to put this on a slight anti-line, get it to hold a decent amount of turn, and then not turning into a roller. It would fight out towards the end. But I do like it as not necessarily point and shoot, but on a slightly windy day, it's going to fight the wind and just have that nice predictable hyzer. Now next in the same kind of slot, battling out the FD, is the Explorer in the Opto X. This is a little bit flatter. The FD had a little bit more of a dome to it. This is a bit flatter, which makes it more comfortable for forehand. Not quite as comfortable when it comes to backhand, but I can't knock the results when it comes to the flight. This is such a true flyer, and honestly, at least out of the hand, it likes to fly so much faster than, I believe it's a speed 7. It likes to fly a bit faster than that. It just shoots like a rocket out of my hand, and then as it slows down, that's when it's going to fade. Now, it does resemble a bit the FD. It just has that, holds the nice hyzer the entire way, and then when thrown flat, it's just going to ride straight, and then just as it slows down, it has that nice finish. So for me, between these two, it's going to come down to the feel and kind of what I'm wanting to use it, if it's going to be more backhand or forehand. Next up, we have the Dynasty in the S blend, the Eric Oakley Dynasty. These are a little bit longer and a bit more understable than, say, the FD or the Explorer. This is going to kind of be not necessarily in the realm of the heat, but maybe would be where if the wind was just up a little bit more, then I'm comfortable with the heat. This would kind of fit in, or I just needed a straighter flight, as this doesn't have as much turn in the mid-flight as I was expecting. It just kind of held straight up until just the really final bit of the flight and had a nice gentle finish at the end. Now, kind of jumping around just a little bit, because next we have another Speed 7, and that is the Eagle from Innova in Champion Plastic. This has a nice bit of dome to it. In fact, it has a great pop top to it. Again, makes it feel very good for backhand. Surprisingly though, even with the pop top, it feels really comfortable forehand because the flight plate on this one specifically is paper thin. So because of it, I can actually bend the flight plate almost to a puddle top. So it gives me an extremely comfortable grip even when it comes to forehand. So if the wind is up just a little bit too much for, say, an FD or an Explorer, this is what I'm going to be reaching for in that kind of slower fairway driver lineup. Something that is going to fight the wind very well, still a bit workable, but it's really going to fight the wind and just give me that predictable hyzer finish every time. Now, kind of battling with the Eagle, we have the Paul Macbeth Athena in ESP Plastic from Discraft. Now, I'm going to be honest with the Athena. It's a disc I want to like. I want to love the Athena, and honestly, I get so many incredible shots with it. But there's just something about the Athena that when I think it's going to do one thing, it does something else. Now, for the most part, it is going to be this. It is going to be that throw it flat into a wind, and it's going to ride really straight and just have a nice finish at the end. Again, just kind of point and shoot in the wind. In calm conditions, it's going to have a real predictable finish and just something you hold out wide and let it hyzer back in towards the target. But for whatever reason, it just sometimes does the opposite of what I think it is. Now, that's more on me than the disc itself, but it's just something I just haven't quite clicked with the Athena yet. Maybe I need to work on it more, but whereas the Eagle does exactly what I want it to do, the Athena, it can be a little hit or miss. Alright, now we're going to get into the fairway drivers that I'm using exclusively for forehand. These are the ones that are just the wind is up, or I need something that is going to dump extremely hard. And we're starting with the Draco, the Kelvin Heimborg Draco. This is such a great feeling disc when it comes to forehand. It is absolutely board flat, if not practically puddle topped, at least this one is, and it's exactly what I would expect this disc to do. Just throw it out flat to slight anhyzer, and it's going to fight its way back all the time. The only knock I can have against the Draco is that because it's flat topped, it doesn't quite feel that great when it comes to backhand. Now next we have the Crystal Flex tracker, and this is not your average tracker. This thing is the 3.0 extremely beefy tracker, puddle topped. I mean, you can see it's completely board flat, perfect for thumbers and great for really short approach shots. All this thing wants to do is hyzer. I mean, even if you put it on an anhyzer line, it is just going to flip up back to flat and then turn into a hyzer immediately. But because it's so overstable, it doesn't have too much distance to it. It's only a disc I'd be throwing 200 feet in. So honestly, it could be used as just a utility disc. Next up, we have the Felon in the Fusion Orbit plastic, kind of a newer run of the Felon, not quite as overstable as some of the other runs that I have, but it also has just a little bit more dome to it. So this is kind of a good medium with the Draco, where the Draco is purely forehand. Yes, I'd be primarily using this on forehand as well. Not quite as overstable as the Draco, has a little bit more turn in the mid-flight, but it does open up a few extra uses for me because it has just a really slight amount of dome in this plastic. It does make it feel very comfortable when it comes to backhand. Now, no overstable section would be complete without a Sexton Firebird. This one I did use for a good amount of time, about a good year and a half when I first started playing. This was actually one of the first discs that I ever purchased. When it comes to overstable fairway drivers, everything tries to be like the Firebird. I feel like it's the original in the disc golf community when it comes to overstable fairway drivers, so I have to give it a solid look, and I do like what I see. It feels comfortable forehand and backhand, so it opens up both those options, and you know what? It also is very overstable. Might be one of those dark horses to make the bag. Now we're getting into the kind of speed 10 range, and again, primarily, just for forehand, because my arm speed, I'm going to be using these for the extra torque resistance that they have for forehand shots instead of backhand, where they're just going to kind of go straight and crash, really going no further than the speed 7 to speed 9 range. And the Onyx is one that I do have a lot of experience with and I love. I know exactly what angles to put the Onyx on to get the exact flight that I like. The only problem is that sometimes in the wind it can get a little bit finicky, so it's not necessarily the most wind resistant, but still very solid. And then going up against the PD from Discmania, this and that new C line, the newer runs of the PD. This really feels very similar to the Onyx. Same kind of lines. As soon as I picked up the PD and was throwing it on the same lines as I was the Onyx, it was doing exactly what I wanted, but it also had a little bit more of a finish at the end. So that way in the wind, it was holding up just a little bit better. So this is kind of that like Onyx replacement for me. It feels a little better in the hand, and it also just flies a little bit better. Alright, that's all I have for you all today. Hopefully you all enjoyed. Be sure to check back soon, as we're going to be getting into the final video very soon here. That is with the all-important distance drivers, which honestly for me is not the biggest section, so it's going to be a quick video, but stay tuned for the distance drivers. As always, everyone, thank you all so much. Till next time, keep banging them chains.